What celebrity death seems a bit too suspicious? Story 1. Elliot Smith. Arguing with his girlfriend, and then when she goes to take a shower in the middle of their argument, he suddenly decides to stab himself twice in the chest with no hesitation wounds. And of course, she pulled the knife out before calling 911. And I think I've read she has exhibited such weird behavior before and since. The live version of King's Crossing from The Echo, where his sister yells, "Because we love you," after he sings, "Give me one good reason not to do it," always makes me tear up. They added it to the studio version of From a Basement on the Hill. So I know people who worked with Smith when he was making his last record shortly before his death. From what I understand, he was in a really bad place and capable of what it said he did. People always talk about the lack of hesitation wounds, but he was open about his suicidal ideations for years in his work. Maybe once you've been dealing with the impulse for so long, you reach a place of resolve that allows you to commit to the act in a way others can't. I don't know. I also think it's plausible that his girlfriend removed the knife because she panicked, or didn't know that it wasn't medically the right thing to do. Not everyone understands how impalement wounds work. I saw him in January of 2003. He was so messed up, forgetting lyrics and notes to his own song. He looked sickly and frail, in general, just really depressed. It was such a sad concert. The group I was with finally agreed that he's going to go in a few years. Well, it was just a few months, I guess. That's what I was about to say. I kind of think it's become more common knowledge now that you don't pull the knife out. Like, you'll always see it mentioned on Ask Reddit threads about emergency advice everyone should know, etc., but it's something that I can totally believe that someone wouldn't know, and if you didn't know, or hell, even if you did, I can totally see someone in a state of panic just pulling it out without thinking. If I saw my husband like that, I swear I could almost see myself instinctively going to pull out the knife if I didn't pause and think for a second. Like, just instinctively, this is the thing that's hurting him. I need to get it out. I have made really dumb choices while in a state of panic and shock, like things that I would have 100% known were the wrong choice if I was thinking clearly. Story 2. Dorothy Kilgallen, reporter and TV personality, died under mysterious circumstances while investigating Kennedy's assassination. It is a fascinating case. I've become a huge fan of hers. Remarkable woman. There are a number of YouTube videos regarding her suspicious death. I particularly like Mark Shaw's lectures on this. Before today, I had no idea who Dorothy Kilgallen was. I was about to go to bed, but now I'll be watching this and staying up way too late. Thank you. You should check out some of the episodes on YouTube of the show What's My Line, on which she was a regular member of the panel. There were a lot of very interesting and famous guests on the show, such as Walt Disney, Eleanor Roosevelt, Salvador Dali, Ronald Reagan when he was an actor, Colonel Sanders before he was doing commercials on national TV for KFC, Mickey Mantle, Sir Edmund Hillary, first person to climb Mount Everest, and tons of the biggest TV and movie stars, musicians, and comedians of the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. There's another similar show called I've Got a Secret that has some very interesting people. For instance, the last living person to witness the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. He was in his 90s when he appeared on the show and was at Ford's Theater to watch the play when he was 5 years old. There was also an episode with Neil Armstrong's parents on the first day he went to space, a few years before he became the first man to set foot on the moon. The host prophetically asked them how they would feel if he became the first man to walk on the moon, which they knew was a possibility since Neil was one of very few astronauts at the time and NASA was actively working on trying to land on the moon. I watch What's My Line as my comfort shows all the time on YouTube, and it's very bizarre seeing all the Kennedy conspiracy theorists in the comments of this very mild-mannered game show. I don't have any real feelings on her involvement with the Kennedy assassination or any potential conspiracies around her death. It's just weird seeing that conversation as a fan of her other work. Story 3. Brittney Murphy for sure. Didn't her husband die in almost the same way soon after? And her mother was staying at her house when she died. Then, when her husband died 5 months later, he and her mother were sharing a bed to comfort each other. I'm not saying her mom did anything to harm her, but that really made me pause. I've always been convinced that the whole thing was a creepy and disturbing Munchausen by proxy situation with the husband. He was a mentally unstable con man, and she was incredibly vulnerable when he came into her life. He died the same way Brittney died, though. It's still weird, though. I do believe both died of a very rare respiratory virus. Brittney was starving herself. Munchak was very overweight and looked like he might have a drug habit. He played up his career, but so do a lot of people, especially in LA. Even weirder, Brittney Murphy bought that house from Britney Spears, who sold it at a loss after she refused to stay a single night in it or even come back to move her furniture out because the place was terrifying to her. I always figured the box of prescription medicine bottles on the nightstand contributed, but in retrospect, those could have been Simon's. There was mold in the house, but her room and the main living area were not in the portion built into the hillside, so I don't think they were so bad. It's been a long time since reading anything on it, but dang was that house weird. Second floor was stuffed with clothes on racks, and there was a queen bed in the middle of the living room. Her mom lived there too. Interesting fact, Britney Spears owned the house prior to Murphy. Yeah, and the house supposedly creeped Spears out so much that she left and never returned to it. Most people were just attributing it to her being her usual not-so-normal self, but makes you question what went on there or what about the house that was so awful that Spears left and never came back. Story 4. Marilyn Monroe's death. I just read 30 minutes ago that the current owners of her last house are trying to tear it down, but there's a temporary hold stopping it for now. Everything about her death makes me sick. I hated hearing about how her body disappeared for a little while. You probably don't want to hear about what happened after she was buried then. Some guy, I think famous, or maybe just rich, had himself buried in a coffin above hers with his body facing down so that it's like he was lying on top of her. That truly disturbs me. What a freaking creep. The fact it was allowed is so disgusting. I believe she OD'd, but I do believe her diaries were confiscated. Agreed. She had a long and intense history of trauma. She struggled with her mental health and substance use. She had little family. She desperately wanted children and couldn't have them. She suffered with endometriosis. These conspiracy theories are just another way to sensationalize everything about her. Everyone needs to let her freaking rest. It's been 60 years. And anyone who knows anything about her life from reputable sources knows she did not have an ongoing affair with JFK. At most, there was a one-night stand. She was not involved in his life, and there was zero reason he'd want her dead. JFK was having actual ongoing affairs with multiple women who never ended up dead. Yeah, a lot of people don't know about her endometriosis, which is normally a very private thing we really don't need to know about, but in her case, it's a pretty important factor in understanding her situation. Story 5. Whitney Houston and her daughter. Whitney's autopsy shows that she had defensive wounds. Maybe it wouldn't be as suspicious if her daughter wasn't also found unresponsive in a bathtub. I was more shocked by her daughter's death than Whitney's, which was also shocking. Very suspicious that the daughter died the same way her mother did, but much younger, 3 years later. First time I hear of her daughter's death or any controversy regarding Whitney's, so what does the rumor kitchen say? Whitney's brothers had placed Bobby under conservatorship to try and control the money. Whitney's will was written to say Bobby would get the money in periodic installments, or if she was dead as well, it would all go in a lump sum to her brothers. Common theory is that the brothers killed Bobby to get all the money now. I read her autopsy recently, and I don't remember seeing defensive wounds, but maybe I just don't recall. Can you provide a source? Looking at the report itself, under the body examination, it mentions antemortem superficial abrasions on her forearms and hands, specifically between her middle and ring fingers, like if you were to throw a punch, a cut on the lip, bruises, and scrapes on her legs. It's a theory that was put out by private detective Paul Hubel. Story 6. Didn't John McAfee get whacked, tattooed on himself, or some stuff just before he died? I may be wrong. I feel like McAfee would intentionally go out like that to mess with people. I think he tweeted, "If I die, I didn't kill myself," right before it happened. He's always been a bit on the crazy side, like having hookers poop through hammocks onto him. That wasn't even close to being the craziest thing about him. He had his neighbor in Belize murdered and dug himself a hole and hid under a box from the police on the beach while live streaming the whole thing. Because the police were so incompetent, he actually ended up getting away by escaping to Guatemala. Reporters from Vice tagged along with him, but one of the reporters decided to announce they were with him and posted a photo that was geotagged, and he ended up getting arrested. However, because he's rich as frick, he got the best lawyer in Guatemala to prevent his extradition, and he escaped. He did all this while high on bath salts, cocaine, and some crazy drug from China. He likely committed seppuku because he pretty much had a life sentence for tax fraud. He had just found out he was getting extradited. If you watch the documentary, he's clearly a meth head, tearing apart his own boat because he thought an assassin was hiding in the engine compartment. Dude was just a tweaker. McAfee was just nuts. His whole life is suspicious, so his death being suspicious too is just a shrug. McAfee was so bug-frick crazy, he got himself a multi-part episode on Behind the Mustards, and his story is gross, morbidly fascinating, and profoundly disturbing. Story 7. This might be stretching the definition of celebrity, but Rudolf Diesel, inventor of the diesel engine, and kind of a big deal in his day, died under really suspicious circumstances. On September 29, 1913, Diesel boarded a ship in Antwerp, Belgium, on his way to a business meeting in London. He never arrived. His bed was never slept in, his shirts remained unpacked, and his pocket watch was open on the nightstand. The crew found his hat and overcoat neatly folded by the aft railing of the ship. The last entry in his diary was simply a cross on the day of the 29th. About 10 days later, they found a body in a channel that was eventually ID'd as Diesel. Pretty straightforward suicide, right? The thing is, he gave his wife a bag when he left with instructions to open it upon his death. It contained 20,000 marks, about $120,000, the whole of the Diesel's bank accounts withdrawn as cash. Diesel had recently declined to sell his patents exclusively to the German government and was on his way to London to meet with representatives of the Consolidated Diesel Company and the British Royal Navy. After his death, no memorial or tomb was built until 1957, when the founder of Japan's Yanmar Diesel Company funded the building of a memorial garden for him. Story 8. Natalie Wood. She had a horrible fear of water, and yet they want you to believe that she got into a dinghy by herself in the middle of the night when it was pitch black and she was wearing her nightgown. Yeah, this happens all the time. I'm still hoping that Christopher Walken speaks up about it while he's still with us. If he hasn't by now, he won't, and most likely because it would possibly incriminate him. Deathbed confessions are the best confessions. You know, because of the implication. She's not in any danger, but she knows she's not going to say no because of the implication. Is that the one where Christopher Walken was there on the boat, along with Robert Wagner? Story 9. In my hometown of St. Louis, Missouri, there was a sculptor and entrepreneur by the name of Bob Cassilly. His works, whimsical and larger than life, are all over the city. The crown jewel of all this is the wacky home of repurposed industrial materials into a crazy sort of playground, the popular City Museum. He was a notoriously driven worker, and in 2011, he died in an apparent bulldozer accident working on a new outdoor art playground project he called Cementland. His death was even investigated, but again ruled accidental, despite one medical expert saying he had been beaten to death and the bulldozer accident was staged. Not a true celebrity, but a local legend here to be sure, and a person who left an indelible mark on his town. I'm honored and humbled by the attention this got. The city needs a lot of earnest work and revitalization and less greed and mistrust, and it's taken me a while, but I'm somewhat proud of my hometown. Cassilly, I think, understood that potential, on top of his rich imagination for turning spaces and landscapes fantastical. He was a unique talent. Story 10. Hang Noor. Oscar and Golden Globe winner for The Killing Fields, Cambodian and former prisoner of the Khmer Rouge, tortured and imprisoned in Cambodia, murdered outside his home in Los Angeles. His family thinks it was revenge from Cambodia for his outspoken support for human rights and bringing people to justice in Cambodia. Survived genocide, murdered anyway. Jesus freaking Christ. Khemlay supposedly murdered by a poor rice farmer who had loaned him thousands of dollars. Complete nonsense. He was murdered because he published articles showing how much wealth was being stolen from the Cambodian people by the ruling elite. Ticks me the frick off that Pol Pot died of natural causes. Story 11. Gareth Williams, that spy that killed himself and then managed to padlock himself in a suitcase. This case is freaking wild. It caused the Metropolitan Police to change the way they handle cases related to the security services. When his body was discovered, MI5 refused to allow the police into the flat until they had done whatever they wanted to. MI5 then removed the front door to the flat, took the entire door with them and left. Then the Met team on the case weren't allowed to directly interview his colleagues in GCHQ or MI5. There was a special Met division that handled the interviews. The team handling the interviews did not take notes or recordings, and it's unsure how much investigative interviewing they actually did. And someone kept leaking things to the press. The press then ran a campaign of he was gay and doing weird gay things, and that's why he died, based solely on the fact he owned women's clothes. If I remember rightly, people within the Metropolitan Police lost their jobs over this case, and an FSB guy that flipped claimed the Russians killed him. Story 12. Jill Dando. She was a British TV presenter, newsreader, and journalist. She was shot on her front doorstep, and it's never been solved. Also, Dr. David Kelly, not exactly a celebrity, but he was a known public figure. He was a weapons expert that supposedly killed himself shortly after saying that the report on Iraq's nuclear weapons had been fudged. Yes, David Kelly, who managed to take 29 pills and slit his wrist with a pruning shear while somehow not leaving a single fingerprint on his own on either the blister pack or the knife. Right after making a public report that was very damaging to the UK government at the time. That very plausible suicide. He fell on his own shears. It was an accident. People have accidents all the time. Story 13. Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones died under suspicious circumstances while swimming. The person he was swimming with, a contractor working on his house who Jones had accused of stealing from him, supposedly confessed on his deathbed to killing Jones. I read an article about the incident and how there was a wild party that night at Jones's home. A neighbor down the road claimed in the early morning hours she heard a bunch of screams coming from the direction of Jones' house. Then, a minute or two later, saw or heard a couple of cars with tires squealing zooming away from Jones' house. I think the coroner ruled the cause as death by misadventure, but something has never sat right with me on that one. Death by misadventure is a legal term for an accidental death where the risk was voluntarily taken. Story 14. Nicole Brown Simpson. From what I hear, her ex is still trying to find the real killer. He even wrote a fanfic about how he would do it. And today, OJ is a free man, hosting his own podcast last I saw, doing lighthearted commenting on sports and stuff. And people are starting to talk about him as a charming old dude who made some mistakes, and to let him be. And people still want his autographs. They want him to appear, etc. Yeah, it's not good, but he did get out again. He doesn't seem especially burdened by a double homicide. Story 15. Don't know if he qualifies as a celebrity, but Yuri Gagarin, Russian cosmonaut and the first man in space. After the Kremlin sent one of his friends to certain death on an extremely unprepared rocket ship in a desperate attempt to catch up with USA's progress, Yuri, a Russian hero and one of the most popular figures at the time, criticized the Kremlin and blamed them for the death of his friend. Not too long after, he died when he allegedly lost control of his MiG-15. The official explanation given by the Kremlin is full of holes, and to this day, no one really knows what happened. but it seems obvious to some that whatever caused his crash, the Kremlin was responsible for it. Story 16. Sridevi. She's a Bollywood actress who died in Dubai from accidental drowning in a bathtub the day after a wedding where she was in perfect health and she had a huge life insurance, which would pay only if she dies in Dubai. Divya Bharti, another Bollywood actress who accidentally fell to her death from the 5th floor apartment. She was only 19, was one of the top actresses, and was married less than a year at the time. Story 17. George Reeves, the guy who played Superman in the 50s. There were a bunch of people in his house the night he died, and a lot of conflicting stories. Also, he was having an affair with the studio exec who was in attendance with his husband that night. Also, forensics disagree with the testimony of the witnesses. It's all a cluster. I've always wondered about this one. Like, he had valid reasons to be very depressed, but everyone's differing stories and his involvement with Tony Maddox was suspicious. I thought Ben Affleck did a great job of playing him in Hollywoodland. Story 18. Not a murder or death, and not really a celebrity, but where is Shelley Miscavige? Either dead or being held in a prison at Gold Base. Scientology is a death cult, and David Miscavige is a psychopath. They really need a Storm Area 51 type event, but Scientology properties. We can even recycle clap alien cheeks. It still works kinda. Story 19. Epstein. A bit? How about a lot? It's one of the few conspiracy theories that actually make sense. Dude spends his whole life blackmailing rich and powerful people with danging things. After being caught and brought to justice, while awaiting trial in his cell, every single camera around his cell goes out and both the guards fall asleep simultaneously while he kills himself. That's what an actual conspiracy looks like. Story 20. Shelley Miscavige, wife of Scientology leader David Miscavige, disappeared 2013 after vocally coming out against the practices of Scientology. Lawyers for the cults, religion, still maintain she is alive and living a private life devoted to Scientology. Right. Also, Shelley's mother, Flo Barnett, who died by suicide after she shot herself 3 times in the chest and 1 in the head with a long rifle. Story 21. Dorothy Kilgallen. She was an investigative journalist and game show panelist on What's My Line. She was digging into JFK when she died of an overdose. Her manuscript on JFK was taken by the government and will never see the light of day. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.